There is a specific, quiet rhythm to the American dream that we've been taught to trust, almost like a heartbeat, for nearly a century. You work hard, you save what you can, and eventually, you claim a little piece of the map for yourself. You spend 30 years chipping away at that mortgage, and in that final, triumphant moment, when the bank sends you the deed, the house is finally yours. It's meant to be the ultimate finish line, a fortress of equity where the outside world can't touch you, and more importantly, where the costs of living are finally supposed to stop chasing you. But lately, that rhythm has started to falter. If you walk through the sun-drenched suburbs of Florida or the quiet tree-lined streets of Arizona, a new and deeply unsettling reality is beginning to surface. People who did everything right, families who literally held parties to burn their mortgage papers, are discovering that they are being evicted by forces they can't sit down and negotiate with. They are waking up to find that holding the deed to the land is no longer a guarantee that they get to stay on it. The math of staying put is changing in a way that feels unfair, almost predatory. It's no longer about what you owe the bank. It's about what you owe a system that never stops asking for more just to keep your lights on and your walls protected. We are entering a strange, difficult era where the middle class is being priced out of the very assets they already spent a lifetime buying. This isn't a typical housing bubble. It is the quiet, painful transformation of home ownership into a permanent, escalating subscription service that you can never quite cancel. We have reached a point where the American home is becoming structurally uninhabitable, not because the windows are broken or the roof is leaking, but because the basic cost of certainty, the price of simply knowing you're safe, has become a luxury that fewer and fewer can afford. To really get a sense of how much the ground has shifted under our feet, we have to look at the cold numbers that define life in 2026. For our parents and grandparents, the biggest mountain to climb was the mortgage. It was a predictable, fixed hurdle that eventually disappeared. Once that debt was gone, your housing costs were supposed to settle into a gentle baseline, maybe 1% of the home's value each year for taxes and a few repairs. That was the unwritten social contract we all signed. Today, that contract feels like it's been shredded right in front of us. In just the last 3 years, the cost of home insurance in states like Florida, Texas, and California has drifted so far from reality, it's hard to wrap your head around. Back in 2015, the average homeowner was looking at a bill of maybe $1,100 a year. But as we move through 2026, that national average has skyrocketed past $3,500. And if you live in a place the industry now considers risky, those invoices are arriving with numbers like $15,000 or $20,000 for a perfectly modest family home. This isn't just a bit of inflation at the grocery store. This is a fundamental global repricing of risk. The insurance industry has looked at the American map and decided that your neighborhood, your street, and your backyard are no longer worth the gamble. But insurance is just the first crack in the foundation. Property taxes, which used to be a slow-moving, predictable expense, have turned into a variable that feels almost predatory. As housing prices were pushed up by big investment firms and a desperate lack of supply, local governments began recalculating tax bills based on those ghost values. Imagine a family in Austin or Nashville who bought their home for $300,000 a decade ago. Suddenly, they're being taxed as if they live in an $800,000 mansion. On paper, they're sitting on a gold mine, but in reality, they're struggling to buy groceries because their actual cash flow is being drained to pay for that imaginary wealth. The difference between then and now is honestly staggering. In the mid-90s, the hidden costs of owning a home, the taxes, the insurance, the non-stop maintenance, usually made up about 15% of what you spent on housing. Today, those same recurring, non-negotiable costs have eaten up nearly 45% of the budget in many cities. We are seeing the rise of a new kind of struggle, being asset-rich but cash-poor. It's a heartbreaking state where you technically own a $500,000 asset, yet you find yourself lying awake at night, wondering how you'll afford a new water heater if this one gives out. This whole mess is being driven by a pincer movement that's closing in from both sides. On one hand, the very bones of suburban America are aging. The cost of the wood, the shingles, and the skilled hands needed to fix them has outpaced regular inflation by double. On the other hand, the reinsurance market, the shadowy global companies that insure the insurance companies, has hiked rates across the planet. They look at our landscape and see a massive liability that no monthly premium can truly cover. The result is a hollowing out of the middle class that doesn't show up on the evening news or in unemployment stats. People are still going to work. They still have their respectable titles and their neatly mowed lawns. But that margin of safety that a home was supposed to provide has completely evaporated. The equity is there, locked behind a glass screen where you can see it but can't touch it, while your day-to-day bank account is drained by a bottomless pit of premiums, assessments, and fees. We've been trained to look at the housing market like a scoreboard. If prices go up, we're told we're winning. But for the person actually living inside that house, a rising price is starting to feel like a rising threat. It's a green light for the tax assessor and the insurance adjuster to come and take a bigger slice of a pie that isn't getting any larger. When the cost of simply standing still exceeds what a hard-working family can earn, the very idea of a forever home begins to feel like a beautiful, fading dream. I want you to think about David and Elena. In 2012, they were the poster children for doing things the right way. David spent his days as a civil engineer. Elena worked long shifts as a specialized nurse. Together, they brought home about $145,000 a year. In almost any other era of American life, that would have meant they were set. They bought a charming 3-bedroom house in a quiet Phoenix suburb for $285,000. For years, their $1,400 mortgage was just a steady, manageable drumbeat in the background of their lives. It was their sanctuary, the place where they saw their kids grow up, and where they pictured themselves eventually rocking on the porch in retirement. By the spring of 2026, David and Elena finally hit that magical milestone they had talked about for 2 decades. They made that very last mortgage payment. Theoretically, they own every brick and every blade of grass on that property. They should be popping champagne. Instead, you'll find David sitting at the kitchen table late into the night, staring at a spreadsheet that just won't balance. The mortgage is gone, but the cost of just existing in that house is somehow exactly the same as when they were still in debt to the bank. Back in 2015, their property tax was a boring $2,100, and insurance was a mere $900. Fast forward to today, and their tax bill has ballooned to $6,800 because their neighborhood became trendy. Their insurance, once a minor detail, has been canceled twice in 3 years as the big companies fled the state. The only policy they could find, a plan of last resort, now costs them $8,200 a year. When you add in the HOA fees that spike to cover the community's own soaring insurance costs, their free and clear home is costing them over $1,600 every single month. The math is a cold, immovable ceiling. Their income has grown a little each year, but their housing costs have grown 4 times faster. This is what we call the structural deficit gap. To pay for the privilege of staying in the home they already earned, they've had to start making heartbreaking choices. They've stopped putting money into their retirement accounts. They're driving a 10-year-old car that's starting to make a worrying noise under the hood. They are, for all intents and purposes, renting their own home from the government and the insurance industry. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that settles into your bones when you live like this. It's not the sharp, sudden shock of being fired. It's the slow, heavy realization that the finish line you've been running toward has been moved while you were sleeping. Elena says it feels like they're living in a house that's slowly eating them alive. Every time the mail arrives with an official-looking envelope, there's a sharp spike of stress. They aren't masters of their domain anymore. They've become high-priced custodians of an asset that is demanding more than they have left to give. The most haunting part for David and Elena is that there is no obvious way out. If they sell, they'll get their equity, sure, but where would they go? Every other safe neighborhood is trapped in the same escalating cost cycle. To move would just be trading one expensive fortress for another. They are trapped by their own success, stuck in a loop where they are paying for their past at the total expense of their future. This isn't a story about people who lived too large. It's a story about the world moving the goalposts so far that even a perfect life isn't enough to stay in the game. To understand why what David and Elena are going through is becoming the new American normal, we have to look past the individual bills and peer into the heavy machinery of the economy itself. This isn't just a string of bad luck, it's a systemic realignment. The maintenance trap is what happens when three massive, invisible forces slam into each other, creating a storm that the old 20th century model of home ownership was never built to survive. The first force is the financialization of risk. It used to be that insurance was a local, almost neighborly thing, but today, your homeowner's policy is tied to the global reinsurance market. These are the massive, faceless corporations that insure the insurance companies. They don't care about your garden or your memories. They operate on cold, hard algorithms that factor in global climate shifts and the skyrocketing cost of construction labor. When a storm hits a coast 3 states away, your risk premium goes up. The system has decided that the cost of rebuilding a modern home, with all its complex building codes and expensive materials, is an escalating liability that you, the owner, have to pay for up front, every single month. The second force is the infrastructure deficit. Much of the suburban America we love was built on a growth at all costs promise. Cities loved it because new developments brought in quick cash from impact fees and a brand new tax base. But now, 40 or 50 years later, that bill is finally due. The roads, the water pipes, and the power grids that serve these neighborhoods are reaching their breaking point. Because so many local governments are broke, they've shifted that massive burden onto you. You aren't just paying for your 4 walls anymore, you're paying for the crumbling, aging skeleton of the city that surrounds them. The third force is perhaps the most cynical, the corporate incentive alignment. In the 2026 economy, stability just isn't very profitable. A homeowner who stays in one place for 30 years with low costs is what Wall Street calls a dead asset. But a homeowner who is constantly forced to refinance, pay rising fees, or eventually sell to a corporate landlord? That's a steady stream of revenue. The system, whether by accident or by design, is stripping away the fixed nature of our lives to turn everything into a high-yield service. This is why the macroeconomy can look great on the news while you feel like you're sinking. GDP goes up when your insurance premiums rise. GDP goes up when your tax assessment spikes. GDP even goes up when you're forced to spend your life savings to fix a sewer line. The metrics we use to measure national success are increasingly being fueled by the systematic liquidation of middle-class stability. We are moving away from being a society of owners and toward a fee-based society. In this new world, the goal isn't to help you own something. It's to make sure that the thing you own never stops generating a paycheck for everyone else. Your home, your fortress, has been turned into a toll booth. The real toll of this shift isn't just found in your bank statement. It's found in the quiet, corrosive way it wears down your spirit. When your home, the one place on earth that's supposed to be safe, becomes an unpredictable source of financial dread, your brain enters a state of constant, low-level alarm. For generations, the American home was the safe zone. Once you closed that front door, the chaos of the world was supposed to stay outside. But in 2026, the market has moved right into the family room. Homeowners today are being forced to act like amateur insurance adjusters and tax lawyers. Instead of enjoying their weekends, they're auditing escrow statements and hunting for mitigation credits just to save a few $100s on a 5-figure bill. This constant state of low-level panic has real physical consequences. We're seeing a massive rise in what's being called asset-based anxiety. It's a very specific kind of fear. It's not that you're going to lose your job tomorrow, but that you're losing the ability to simply maintain what you have. This creates what doctors call allostatic load, the literal wear and tear on your heart and your brain from being in fight or flight mode for years on end. When you're constantly doing the mental math on whether you can afford a plumbing repair or the new tax bill, you never truly rest. The result is a society-wide exhaustion. It's hard to plan for your grandkids' college or start a new business when you don't even know what your fixed costs will look like in 18 months. We are seeing a kind of decision paralysis, where people just stop moving, stop dreaming, and stop investing in their communities because all their mental energy is being sucked into the gravity of the maintenance trap. And the scary part is, the escalation is still climbing. We're now seeing the rise of climate-adjacent foreclosures. These aren't people who are irresponsible with their money. These are people who simply cannot get the insurance that their mortgage company requires them to have. When a home becomes uninsurable, it's treated as a default risk. The bank can then step in and force a policy on you that's 3 times the price, or they can start the process of taking the house away. The ladder that led so many of us into the middle class is being pulled up, and it's not being done by one villain, but by the very systems we thought were there to protect us. We have a population that is physically housed, but psychologically, they feel like they're living on a fault line. We are left staring at a paradox that defines American life in the mid-2020s. On paper, the middle class has never been wealthier. Our homes are worth staggering amounts of money. Our equity is at an all-time high. But if you talk to people in their kitchens after the kids have gone to bed, the feeling isn't one of wealth. It's a feeling of precariousness. We have built a world where the ultimate prize, owning your own home, has been transformed into a perpetual growing liability. If your house is no longer a fortress, what is it? If the deed in your safe doesn't actually give you the right to a predictable, peaceful future, then the social contract that held this country together for 100 years has fundamentally broken. We are transitioning from being a nation of proud owners to a nation of high-stakes occupants. We have become the stewards of assets that we can look at, and maybe even be proud of, but can no longer truly afford to hold on to. There isn't a simple law or a quick fix for this, because it's not just one leak in the pipe. It's the aging of the entire system. It's what happens when global risk, local debt, and the relentless drive to turn every part of our lives into a profit center finally collide. As we move into this uncertain future, the question for the American family is no longer, when will I finally pay this house off? The real question, the one that keeps us up at night, is much simpler and much more haunting. How much longer will they let me stay? In the end, we may find that the most expensive thing you can ever own is the one thing you thought you had already paid for in full. The lights are on, the grass is neatly cut, and the door is locked tight. But the system is already inside.